It was positively a Mormeric idea just from the very jump. You would expect this sort of thing out of utterly dysfunctional country like China. But as it turns out, we have plenty of morons right here in the US to approve such thing. I remember shaking my head in disbelief at the magazine article when I first learned of the head project, Chicago to get artificial mountain in 2028. I stared at the hideous CG rendering and read the blurb. Officials say mountain will bring tourism, jobs, and habit of wildlife. It was not April 1st, and this was not a satire publication. Some no-name athletic dick from Russia, or was it France, had actually gone, but not approved, but a hefty sum of taxpayer funding to the building monstrosity of his fantasies. In a city like Chicago, you could hardly build a gas station without having to jump through hundreds of miles of hoops and red tape. Yet this guy virtually go blanks check from the city, state, and federal government to build this loathsome public art project. The grants had already been made, which meant this thing was a big part, was just past the point of being one of those ideas you read about sometimes to look cool when some people but you know will never come anywhere close to fruition. Like a space elevator in the popular science or a proposal to build a skyscraper out of living material or whatever. This guy had actually come in and said, "Hey, I noticed your city doesn't have mountains. I could fix that." And that was taken seriously. You would think that there would be a public outcry over the government's intention to use untold billions of taxpayer dollars to build a world's biggest eyesore, since the Mount Rushmore in the middle of the city already had plenty of that in the way of horticulture and tourist attractions. One of my thoughts was that he had to be one of the kind of test. The government of Cook County, Illinois, and the United States haven't gotten away with such shit over the decades. Finally just conspired to see what it would take for the public to come out with them with such literal torches and pitchforks by doing the stupidest thing imaginable, making them pay for it and having it by something that many of them would be reminded of constantly, because they had to drive past the result every day on the way to work. Alas, there was no great public outcry, at least not at first. Many people just didn't believe it was going to happen intentionally. I talked to this one guy at the bar who said he never believed in the mountain until construction actually started. When the construction started, I bled 5 years behind schedule. People started getting concerned. The first thing they did was take the poorest, most crime-ridden neighborhood they could find and put it under eminent domain. Like that old computer game Sim City, it just displaced a few thousand residents so they could plop the fake mountain there. And yet, even as Chicago started to become a national laughingstock, the mountain project actually endured defenders. People would write letters to the editor in the leading Chicago newspaper saying the project had been needed for years. Politicians are far from shying away and hoping people would forget anything that had to do with the project being approved. Touted how well the mountain would be used for scientific purposes in a way that natural mountains could not let that being a bit of genius logic sink in for a bit. Taking some head on the TV said the mountain, and would finally put the thing to Chicago in the same tier of the global cities as New York and London. And eventually I started hearing stories that other cities in the US and around the world were thinking about installing their own mountains. They never did though, because the project planned out exactly as I predicted it would be. They got a little over halfway done before the money ran out, and everyone was to complete the shock and surprise sarcasm, so no one was supposed to know the answers, seemed to know where the rest of the money went. They spent a bunch of weeks passing the buck circles while the EPA started investigating the giant pile of limestone and concrete with a gaping hole in the top of this environmental hazard that they somehow hadn't thought it would be before the building began. The architect and the couple other project leaders lined up and disappeared. no doubt fearing the prosecution and legitimation for something. I felt no small amount of pride when the Heads family finally started to roll. Not content to simply watch politicians and bureaucrats that faced the confidential hearings, I used massive failure venticity against anyone I knew who had been on the side of those who insisted on the mountain was a good idea, and I had attacked and slandered people like me who had saw it what it was. One of my two sisters-in-law who liked to pick political fights, extended family gatherings and that smug. I'm just making a conversation. Sorry if you can't see in my way. Kind of way once had told me I was behind the times that if I didn't want to help to boost the local economy and help to the environment with the mountain, I should just move up to Mississippi or someplace where people were in more line with your thinking. Boy, I did have fun rubbing her nose into it when shit like this hit the fan, and I didn't do it up front in the way she could easily dodge or defend against. Instead, I would needle with her in the subtle, passive-aggressive ways whenever she would start to get a chip, like at Thanksgiving, when she started slamming my uncle for some being too apathetic about charity in her view. I made the casual comment not to butter in the table. How about I wondered if anyone hadn't heard from the mountain extra in since he disappeared. I got a few chuckles, and it wasn't enough to make her squirm and make her shut up. A few more times of using the boon to stubbly troll her, she eventually stopped bringing up politics at the holidays. Altogether something my family is probably going to be grateful for me. But having some vintageous fun at my sister-in-law's expense didn't help the fact that we were now stuck in the half-finished monument no one wanted, or had any idea what to do with. The project didn't have any champions left, so it was never going to be finished. But at the time cleaning it all up would be at least as troublesome and expensive at this point. Not to mention the fact that the big project would have to be agreed upon taking the mountain's place, since the government wasn't going to give all the poor people their houses back. This dilemma momentarily resolved when the mountain unexpectedly became a viable research site. While rumors were going around that Disney had plans to buy Mount Applegate, the official name was Mount Stable, but the state politician who had opposed to the mountain had brilliantly called Mount Applegate after his election rival, who had made the mistake of not retracting his early intensive support for the mountain once it became clear that the mountain was a mistake. Even though he never voted in the project, the name struck, and it was enough for his doom to political career and turned into a ski resort. These weird birds flew in from nowhere. From February through March, an unknown bird species migrated through the droves, even often at night and during storms. They arrived in thousands, stopping at Mount Applegate, driving off the seagulls who had just started to roost there, and forming a colony. Naturalists captured some and determined for them to be swallowed in taxon. They were similar to cliff swallows, but larger than much more black coloration. One of the naturalists claimed that they were from somewhere in South America based on the dubious bacterial test, but no other scientist came out and supported this theory. Like cliff swallows, they built their colony by making clay, mixing dirt with their own saliva, but they made their clay at a much higher efficiency than the cliff swallows. They would never score at the city at night, collecting subtle dirt as fast as they could and bringing it back to the mountain. Eventually scientists realized that they were making far more clay than it was necessary to build their nests. They came to the conclusion that shocked everyone. Looking back, I think the scariest and most unsettling part of the whole thing was watching scientists on TV desperately beating around the bush when it came to the conclusion what they had come to, trying to avoid being the first one to say it out loud, but wanting everyone to get into jest. They had to conclude that the oversized nocturnal swallows were attempting to finish the mountain. Wherever it was the case or not, they never did, because Mount Applegate collapsed a few months later. Lawn fissures had begun showing up, so people knew it was going to happen. and thus it was a plenty of footage. The collapse was surprisingly quiet, but it caused a mild tremor that could be felt for a split second around much of the city. It also felt as if a cloud of dust and debris that lingered for more than an hour. At this point, there were more serious proposals just to make it official and turn the site into a literal landfill. But first, naturalists wants to go dig through some of the rubble to see if they could find any dead specimens of swallows. The flock had been seen flying a few minutes before the collapse, and they were never found again. They were found in specimens, but not the kind they were looking for. Specimens they found were fossils, as in classic bone and stone fossils. They had found thousands of embedded them in the limestone that they had been used to build the mountain. None of the workers who had constructed the project had any idea how they got there. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.